he bought a business, and so kind of stepped in, made that purchase, and gave it a good shot for a couple of years, but it ended up closing down because it just like crash and burn a little bit, unfortunately. The biggest portion of that drive and that desire for me really was just like responsibility, ownership, and really just like wanting to have really the freedom and be able to be in that seat where I kind of had control of my own destiny.
Welcome to the Engineered Success Podcast, where we sit down with engineers, entrepreneurs, small business owners, leaders, people like you and me that are on their journey of success and really trying to understand the most efficient and best path to get there and really what success means for them. So I'm excited to be joined today by Jason Busscher and getting a dive into the conversation of his journey and how he got to become a business owner and leader today.
Yeah.
So Jason,
absolutely.
thanks for coming out.
Certainly. Very exciting. It's kind of a fun opportunity to just be like, hey, what's up? And make, again, continue the connection with you and kind of just reconnect on a fun conversation in general.
Yeah, this is going to be great. So from getting to where you are today, always love to build on kind of the foundation of where you came from, right? And so that background and how that leads into some of the decisions and some of the paths that you've been on over the years. So let's get started with the very beginning. So tell me about Jason from the early years.
Yes, early years, man, never a dull moment. I mean, grew up West Michigan native, and so specifically Holland area. And so mom still lives there, which has been great. And then it's like, so that's where my parents were, and my parents grew up there, mostly my dad specifically, and probably more about my story in that as we get into it. But yeah, so kind of grew up there, went through Holland Christian schools, was a part of all of that kind of stuff. And so, kind of being in that area, and then eventually, kind of stepped out a little bit, but ultimately I've stayed in West Michigan for like since, so, which has been really good. So, but yeah, and if there's
so I'm curious about Holland. So, obviously West Michigan, right?
Yep.
You've been here for your whole life. It sounds like maybe we'll get into how you traveled or anything like that. But what did you like most about Holland and that environment? I'm sure there's pros and cons, things that you liked and didn't. But as we set that foundation, what are some of the things that you pulled away from Holland in that environment?
So Holland is, it's ironically like a small town, but not such a small town really so much anymore. And so obviously, kind of a few years back, maybe a few decades back, it kind of was an interesting shift that's happened over the years, where it's kind of gone from more of what felt like growing up as like, like a very family oriented town. It's like a lot of churches and everything else, which I mean, I grew up in the church and kind of grew up with faith as a very regular part of my life. And, which has been honestly a huge blessing, kind of looking back at everything. And, but, Holland itself in general has always had some very interesting influences. Obviously, like we've got tulip festivals, we've got all sorts of interesting things happening on that front, which, kind of growing up a part of it, you're like, is that not normal? It's like some of those funny things where everything's got tulip down. Exactly. But that's part of it where, I also grew up very musical. And so I always talk about like, kind of by the time I graduated high school, I was probably in like 5 different music groups between like vocal stuff and band and orchestra and everything else. And so, being in those parades and that kind of stuff, like super huge memories, just, sometimes the absurdity of it, where it's like, sometimes, I don't ever feel like I need to go back because like I'll live that. Yeah, we're good. But also it still is just kind of, it's very entertaining to just kind of watch and experience Holland and just kind of like appreciate, like owning that heritage a little bit. And, kind of going back, it's like our family, we fell into that category of, kind of Dutch, and like with some German mixed in. And so it was always very, very cultural. And, I think being a part of the Busscher family as we were, which, my dad and his family and his parents, like Busscher natives, or like Holland natives, and, not going to say Dutch mafia, but Dutch mafia. It wasn't that bad at all, but it was more one of those, like, you kind of go in the Holland area, and part of growing up there was like a lot of people knew the Busschers, which was just kind of funny. So, and a lot of that ties into, we start looking at what was it like growing up in a family of people who actually were very engaged in business and ownership and everything else on that front as well. So, but yeah, Holland. Exciting place.
Yeah, I'm gonna dive a little bit deeper into the comment you made about a family that's comes from owning businesses and running businesses. Absolutely. We'll tap into that a little bit. But before that, you mentioned you were musical and you're involved in parades and things. At what age did you pick up your first instrument?
Great question. I think I probably started singing probably when I was like, I want to say 10, 11, 12, somewhere in there. And so actually that was probably more actually singing in church was kind of where that really started to kick off. And family's always been super musical. That was something that like my mom's family always really had. And so, which, I look at my aunts and uncles and my cousins, and like half of them are in ministry and half of them are involved with music and doing really cool things. And it's like, that's just, it's a part of who we are, which is also fun too. So, but yeah, so kind of started there. Picked up the guitar for the first time when I was in high school. That was probably like junior year of high school or something like that. But, yeah, and then just kind of let it run from there. And but through also like kind of middle school starting off, I played the euphonium, so I was in band. Kind of had that whole thing going on too. So you kind of learn to be a part of a group, and you like getting all nerdy with the music and everything else, which is kind of spiraled into everything else.
So singing in front of a group at church at 10, right?
Somewhere in there.
Yeah, at that age. So
yeah, I was
young.
surprisingly young. Yeah.
Do you feel like, and just real briefly jumping ahead a little bit, do you feel like you're confident in front of crowds?
It's a very interesting conversation. I've done a lot of thinking about this, and the irony and the interesting thing about it is, while I am more of like an introverted type person, it's just like part of my character and who I am and just how I interact with the world, right? The irony is like being on stage and doing musical things, like even today. So I still am involved at church today, and I sing and I play, and it's like, yeah, I actually do feel quite comfortable up there. It's ironically enough, then it's like you feel more comfortable when you're like, oh, we're off the stage, and now it's like, it's just kind of like the after stuff. But yeah, no, that's definitely been something where being in front of people and that kind of thing is become comfortable, because it's just been a way that I've been able to use gifts and be able to kind of express, and then also just share that with with the rest of the people at church, and just kind of a chance to serve in that way too. So
you mentioned your mother a little bit. You mentioned your family a little bit from the Holland area. Did you have any brothers and sisters? Only child?
Yes, I had 2 younger sisters.
Okay.
They're still out there doing awesome things.
Yeah.
Yep, both moms hanging out and married and doing the family thing, which has been great. So it's kind of fun getting nieces and nephews for sure. So
nice. And they were musical as well. Were they involved in kind of the church praise band and stuff growing up?
A little bit, yeah. So they engaged maybe a little differently, but we all kind of learned to sing early. And then it was so my middle sister was let me see, yeah, she played the violin for a little bit, and youngest sister was like playing clarinet and had 1 or 2 other instruments that she enjoyed as well, but they didn't quite grab onto it quite like I did. But they're both musical and enjoy that as well. But it's also, they kind of found some different interests along the way too. So
yeah. And you mentioned you were in like 5 different groups by the time you got into college or something like that. I was curious, you mentioned marching band, the church, some of the different things. Were you ever in like a band with your friends, or playing the guitar and doing things like that? Or
the funniest thing about that is I've had like a couple people ask me that, with the music and what I'm doing today, and it's like, ironically enough, I never got that far. Like I never actually got to a spot where I was able to actually jump in and do like an actual like fun band kind of thing. I'm not sure why. It just never quite grabbed onto it. Maybe I was always looking at something else, or pushing in a different direction. So
yeah, no, it's kind of fun just drawing some parallels there. So I played the drums in church and stuff growing up. My family was involved in the praise band and all that. But then in high school, I kind of started a band, joined a band kind of thing, did the whole band thing.
That's awesome.
And that actually led into my first business, which was doing concerts and promotions, and actually renting out venues and then bringing in the bands and doing things like that. And
cool.
Yes, I would hire the wrestling team to come and do security and things like that. But one of the main venues that I did shows at was the Park Theater in Holland.
Oh, sure.
So I did a lot of shows there, kind of freshman. So this would be, early on. So freshman, sophomore year of college is when I started to do that, because I still did that into college a little bit. But anyway, kind of music to business. That was my journey.
Business. Yeah.
And on your side, you had some experience, it sounds like, observing kind of business ownership in that.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your first case of observing business ownership.
Absolutely. Oh, so I said it earlier, kind of growing up in a family of business owners, right? And that's very true on my dad's side. So my grandfather is, so he was a partner in a CPA firm. My basically all of my uncles ended up either owning their own business or a part of, other businesses at kind of ownership level. My father started out as kind of worked through with his CPA, but got into business management, not really ownership, but for, as he kind of, continued to get into business and do different things, he always had that drive. And so I kind of, looking back on his story, it was always very entertaining to just kind of look back and understand, it's like the more I kind of ultimately like think and understand more about him is like, I kind of look at his early years in his career, and it was like kind of just growing and ladder climbing. And then eventually like this itch just got him, where it was like he wanted to kind of jump in and own a business. And so he took a step one day, and this was probably when I was in high school. Yeah, definitely in high school. He bought a business, and so kind of stepped in, made that purchase, and, gave it a good shot for a couple of years. But like, for whatever reason, I don't even know the full details, but it ended up closing down because it just like crash and burn a little bit, unfortunately, with some of the timing. And, obviously 2008 was in the mix there. So there was very likely some, just financial crisis things that happened. And obviously some other stuff there that was like just bad timing and unfortunate things. And I think it was a huge learning experience for him because he gave it a shot again. And he worked and started his own company again, kind of doing financial business systems consulting and Excel consulting and some fun things like that, which he did until up until July, actually, which is when he actually passed away this year from cancer. So that's kind of been, look at kind of his story and where he's going. I'm very much in a space right now of I'm involved in his business and kind of what he was working on and where he was going with things, but I'm also having that opportunity to really look back and understand more about him through his business. And so, which has been very, very enlightening. And obviously, like, you just happen to learn stuff. And so kind of tying that back to just like, looking at his life story and understanding where he is, just that idea of, wanting that, I'm not exactly sure if it was like an autonomy thing for him that he wanted to drive into that, or if it was, just like a feel like a need to keep up or what it was, but he had the drive and there were some things there, and he had some skills, but there was other things that he was, I can look back and I can see that might've been a space where he was lacking in skill set. But yeah, so kind of just looking at that and kind of growing in that and watching him grow through that and being a part of that as, kind of, in my younger years, and then kind of watching that more as I've grown older as well, has been very entertaining. And I can definitely look back at my own story and see that parallel and kind of just see how he like imprinted on me, really. And, just from like a drive, from an ability and a wanting to provide and all those things related to like, okay, how does this, how does this impact my life and how do I want it to impact my life, and kind of stepping into those things too. So, but yeah, and a lot of family businesses is where we start that conversation.
Thanks for breaking that down, and sorry to hear about the recent loss in your family. And one thing that I really appreciated in what you said is, as you went through that, you've had the chance to kind of take a look back and look through your father's life and really hey, some of the decisions that he made, with the family, with the business and things, and kind of unpack that. And it's like, sometimes we throughout our journeys don't take the time just to kind of pause and be reflective of like looking back. I know sometimes even on these conversations, I've talked to different individuals, and even myself sometimes it's like, man, I never really, why haven't I thought about that? Like actually, my father had these things in mind when he, had those conversations with me when I was in high school, right?
Yeah.
At the time I was just like, okay, but now it makes a lot of sense, right? And it was very intentional or not, depending on the story. Absolutely. But it's good to just kind of reflect and be able to, understand a little bit more throughout the process. Now, you mentioned your grandfather too, who owned a CPA firm, and you're in high school, you're in middle school, and you're seeing this go on. Did you get the chance to like go visit, like see him at work or observe him working at all, or was it more just from afar?
Every once in a while I'd end up over there and we'd hang out for a bit, but it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was kind of a regular experience at all. So most of my interaction with kind of with the business owners in the family was really more like just kind of, like side things, watching stuff happen and understanding, it's like, and then as you get older, you realize like, oh yeah. And you start to understand more about like, what does it mean to be a business owner? And you start to like, just connect these very real dots of like, oh, hey, there's Busker Septic. Hey, that's my dad's cousin, it's like, and things like that, as you start to put pieces together. And, and there's realizing too, is like, wow, this like, the family network here is like impressive, and there's just like a lot of things that happen, which is really cool. And you kind of start to realize that, a big piece of really of doing this is the network. It's understanding, and being able to leverage, whether it's family connections or, good connections in general, just about like, hey, like, yeah, we're tied to things and we get tied through family or through other experience and everything else. But yeah.
Now, if you think back to some of those early memories of watching your grandfather or your father kind of go through some of those business owner processes or journeys that they had, can you recall if you had a positive or a negative like view on being a business owner?
Yeah, I guess I always thought it was a really cool thing.
Yeah.
Like I actually thought it was really great. And that's one of those too, it's like, I think you go through things, and obviously, like we've both experienced this in business and ownership, and specifically we talked about earlier, where like there's a point of saying there are good things and there are bad things, and it's like there are challenges, but there are benefits. And so you kind of put these together, and it's like, I think from, one thing I think is particular about my family too, is like we'd hear more about the good than we would the bad, so it's like we often would be, it's like, hey, good year, and things have been going really well, but then you don't really hear until later. It's just like, ooh, actually that wasn't really in a healthy situation. It's like, again, that's kind of partly a time for me in the last couple of years, really looking back at some of the businesses and understanding that things weren't always super shiny and peachy. I was like, there were some very hard times, things closed, like there was hurt. And this is the other thing too. It's like, you kind of look at this too, where I look at it and I say, okay, so family business is like, it's been one of those things that I've experienced firsthand and seen it and been a part of it at some level, multiple levels. And you look at that and it's like, family business is like just this incredible blessing, but man, does it hurt when it goes bad. There's just a lot that can happen there where, money and family are like, don't mix very well. And that's one of those, you learn that like, you either learn it or you don't. And unfortunately, when you learn it, it's usually not in a good way. And things happen and it's like, oh, oof.
Yeah.
So
yeah, here's ways of not to do it and not to respond. And
right.
I think, I've been noticing this throughout my journey and throughout life as well, is like, even if you think you know how to handle a certain situation, you don't really know until after you do it. Because it's kind of like, oh, I've never experienced that before, but it can't be. How hard can it be? And then afterwards it's like, oh, yep. Yeah, that was the wrong way to do it.
Wrong decision.
Here's the next way. And I think sometimes like you can read as much as you want. You can have people pour into you, and which is great, for those people that, can learn from that. For me, I just needed to experience the pain myself.
Yeah.
Like, well, that was a way I shouldn't have said that.
Well, talk about, like universal truth alert, because it's like, that's one of those things. And I totally agree in the fact that some things you can't understand unless you go through it. And so, and some of those things where it's like some boundaries that you may have put in place now are only exist because you were like, I got burned. I needed something in place to be able to protect myself or to understand where this is, or something else mattered more.
Yeah.
Yep. And so that's kind of where, I found some of those kind of college and shortly after college, where I was transitioning myself out of, kind of graduating and getting into the workforce. As an engineer, getting out there, we can talk more about that in a little bit, but so kind of getting into this world of realizing, okay, there's starting to be some income, there's starting to be some things happening here while my dad is spinning up his company and being like, all right, you have a decision to make, Jason. It's like, okay, do we actually want to be a spot where we engage together and we, it's like Jason is investing with his father's company, or based on what you've learned and what you've seen, perhaps is that a healthy boundary to avoid? And so I went the latter, because I think what my really hope was in that moment was to actually, I wanted the relationship, and I didn't want anything in the way of that when I was looking at it. But yeah, you're exactly like, in that instance, it's like, that's a lesson that you learn the hard way if it goes wrong. So,
yeah, it's really like, how do you do both, right?
Right.
If there's an opportunity to keep the relationship and be able to thrive in business, if it really makes sense together, how do you do that? And, I think with other conversations too, just really boiled down to just ensuring that whoever's involved in the relationship and conversations just really good with open and transparent conversation.
Clarity.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Don't assume anything.
Yeah.
The minute you start assuming things, it becomes a problem. So you mentioned college. So let's get into that maybe, but let's take a year or two back and talk about your high school. You still went to Holland Christian in high school.
Yep.
And then you were in band, you were wearing the wooden shoes in the parades. And then you decided to go to engineering school, it sounds like. Tell me. I
did. Yeah. So kind of making the transition, obviously being in high school, a couple of like the last years there, obviously like everybody's kind of on their on the path of being like, okay, what do we do? You know, it's like you're talking to everybody and like you take an aptitude test and they're like, hey, this, or someone walks up to you and be like, hey, you're good at math and science. You should be an engineer, which is what I heard, which is kind of funny. I can still hear that. But through that process, you also understand, and I look back and it's like there were a couple classes that really grabbed me, you know, at that age where, you know, like looking at drafting, looking at, you know, some of the more just physical engaging, but also like just the design elements and kind of which does really lead to that mechanical setting, which mechanical engineering, it's where I kind of was starting to look and realize going into college, that's where I wanted to go. And so I ended up going to Calvin here in Grand Rapids. And which was kind of funny because that was I got that recommendation from a guy I went to church with. His name was Jim, and he was like, if you want to do engineering, you should go to Calvin. And I was like, let's go. So it was great.
Did you evaluate any other schools, or was kind of like
Nope.
Calvin's the school?
I didn't.
Okay.
For some reason, I was just like, all right, I'll trust that. Let's go.
Yeah.
And so obviously, like, got in was good. And I was like, if looking back, I was like, I probably should have looked at other schools because if that didn't work out, it could have been a different journey. But no, it was good, and it was difficult, but also healthy because that was one of those, you know, I think going from high school where I, you know, like everybody goes through this kind of thing, right? You get your first year in college and you're like, oh, that's what you have to do to study and everything else, but starting to build the habits, right? And get to a spot where you have all of a sudden this, like, you now have a workload and things that you have to do and responsibilities. And it's like, it's always kind of coming of that real thing where, you know, the responsibility piece for me has always been, you know, we talk about like big picture themes. Like that's one that always resonated for me, like even at an early age, like just kind of, you know, starting to work early and working through high school and working through college and kind of starting to understand where all that played into it. And so like the responsibility piece, it's like I learned more and more through the schoolwork at Calvin and then, you know, kind of working through, some specific ones. The thing that pops into mind is I was looking at Calvin and working through senior year specifically with senior design, some of those things. There was like, you know, one of those big grab moments was like, all right, we're like halfway through the semester and it's like, we're not making a lot of progress. You know, it's like our team was like, we were fine, like smart guys, but also like not really anybody in leadership yet. And so like, you know, but just kind of being like, okay, here's a first trigger, and we're leaning more into that responsibility mode again of being like, hey, that's a thing we got to get after. So, but yeah, so.
Did you jump into leadership in that?
I did.
Okay.
I did because I had to.
Yeah. But it wasn't something that you like naturally, like sometimes you're in those settings in college or even a work environment. There's certain people that just like step forward and they're like, I'm comfortable project managing. There's other people that are like, all right, who's going to project manage here? So that was something where it sounds like you waited a little bit.
I did.
It's like, no one's doing this. Okay, I guess I have to.
Right.
It wasn't natural.
Yeah. And that's where, you know, I jumped into that story a little short too, but I think kind of as I look at, you know, my own story of talking about like my growth through college it was more of that, okay, I'm kind of watching, I'm kind of just a part of, and I always knew like there was natural leadership ability for me that I started to discover, you know, through that phase as well. And definitely after college, it definitely popped. But I think a big part of, you know, for me through that process and just how college affected me was really just this idea of like, you can exist on the sideline, but is that actually where you want to be? And kind of just understanding, you know, even through that senior design project of being like, someone needs to own this. Why not me? Mm-hmm. And through that process too of saying, okay, I actually can do this. This is skills that I have. This is things that are here. So like that whole process for me triggered a number of things that then, you know, pushed me out into the world and created some very entertaining conversations throughout, you know, the following years really and decades as we get to today. But
do you regret stepping up and making that, hey, I'm gonna, you know, move this forward, someone's got to do it?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Not at all.
I was curious, like, you know, if you're talking to someone that's like, hey, my group's in a similar situation, or I'm on a team that's like lacking a leader and I feel like someone should step up and do it. What's maybe a piece of encouragement or an idea that they could jump into?
Great question. I think in that situation, there's a few things to just realize right off the bat. The first one is often, you know, in a team environment, you're exactly right. Sometimes a natural leader will come forward and some people will grab onto that and some people will go. But in an instance where nobody's really doing it, the conversation becomes very quickly of like, we need to make progress. We need to do this. And I would say, you know, like in that instance where nobody's doing it, I would rather have all three of, you know, 3 or 4 people in a group grab it all at once. And then you have to talk about who's actually doing what, like force the conversation and like, don't be afraid to jump in and grab it. Cause if you have that skill and you have that drive, odds are it will be you, which is good. And it's like, but it's at a minimum, especially in kind of a cool college setting where there's a neat project going on, it's that in itself is is an example and a place where you can learn, learn leadership, learn what it takes to manage, and some of those other things too. So
give it a try,
yeah,
and then you
give it a
get
try
into it and say, okay, I tried the leadership thing in college and got into leading my senior project. I know now, as I get into the workforce, that's not where I don't want to be a leader. I want to be a contributor or whatever, it ends up being.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned, I think it was Jim, and then you mentioned your father and a few others throughout your life that have, you mentioned he gave you advice for colleges and different things. Can you pinpoint at this stage, through college, any mentors or people that you go to for advice?
Yeah. So, man, I wish I'd had a few more mentors kind of when I was in that age. I think part of what I realized about myself, in time and over time was really that I was probably am by nature a bit of a loner, and I think I let that grow a little bit too much. And so I really didn't start getting into more mentorship really until after I was out of college even. And so starting to get into some instances and some leadership positions, and then it really took off probably, after, so my first job was in Kalamazoo for like 3 years. And then when I moved to Grand Rapids and got involved in the church I am now, that's where like the mentorship for me really started more. And that was kind of just an opportunity with a small group and with some other people. And again, being involved in music, which was ironic and awesome. But all of those processed together, that's more where I started. And yeah, I think that's one of those, like, high school and college would have been great to have a little bit more mentorship, but I didn't take it because I was like, oh, it'll be fine. I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm good. Yeah. So
figure it out. And then as you were in college, obviously going through courses, some of them easier than others. What were some of the like big things that coming from, Holland to Calvin, similarities, you feel like you were prepared? I mentioned a little bit of like needing to learn how to study and, different things, but anything else that comes to mind through that transition?
One of the nice things about it was that, you talk about feeder schools, like Holland Christian to Calvin was, it wasn't quite the Holland Christian to Hope, or, there's a couple other like Christian universities around in the area and even kind of in the Midwest where, like people would just naturally go. But I'm pretty sure probably at least 30 or 40% of my class went to Calvin. So it's like, it was nice having some friends that came along, which was really good. Other than that, it's like, and kind of, there was obviously, the tie, in the faith aspect as well. That was really great, kind of having that parallel there as well, even though I didn't really appreciate it at the time, which is its own story probably. But so through that, there definitely were some parallels. But other than that, like the starkness and like the challenge of the classwork at Calvin versus Holland Christian was way different, as mentioned, like trying to be like, oh, we gotta step it up here. I got way too good at Guitar Hero, as my mom would say. But, it's one of those things. And so you kind of work through it. And, but yeah, so some, but not as many as you might expect, I think, as far as things go. Different city, different engagement. Obviously, you're out there on your own. It's like we're making new friends and things are happening and changing. So, but I think in that instance, though, too, like, you kind of said and half mentioned it earlier where, like the I'll figure it out mentality. It's like, I'm going to quote myself because I said this the other day, a small group, which was just, I laughed so hard at myself. I was like, I basically operate my life on the premise that I know what I'm doing. And so, which kind of really ties into that mentality where like, even as a kid, it was like, I'll figure it out. I know how this works, and it's like, it always tied very much to like, ironically, it's like engines, cars, mechanical things, system things, house things. Like that was always one of those, like I had those skills and they continue of just like, and it kind of gave me that bit of confidence in that area to just understand how things work. And then it was kind of like, it was something I could lean back on and be like, oh, we'll figure it out. Yeah. And that definitely affects how I operate today still. But I
think that's what it really takes to make that first step, right? A lot of times you you're in conversations and people won't make that first step, or, they go and do lots of reading and studying so that they know the full story. It's like, just make that first step, solve that first problem. You have to have confidence in your ability to solve problems. And when I think back to college and, I went to Grand Valley State, and some of the things that I learned, I continuously say this, like, I pulled out of it like critical thinking and learning how to be confident and just jumping in and solving a problem, right? There are so many scenarios where it's like, I got no idea, but it's due on Monday or in 3 hours. So
we got to do this.
Someone's got to do it. I might as well jump in. And the more reps you get with just jumping into things that you don't know the answer to, being confident with asking questions and, resources, building up that network of when I don't know, this is who I talk to.
Absolutely.
And the better you get at that, the more confident you're going to get into jumping that problem. And that just, again, comes into, experience there. I've heard it said, on this podcast and others, the idea of naive optimism, right? Yeah. I'm optimistic I can solve it. I don't know how, but that's fine.
So we're going to get there. We're going to get there.
Make it happen. And then, so in college, you obviously were doing projects and things like that. Were you working in college as well, or kind of focused on school at that time?
I was. And so mostly through junior year, I was kind of just working during the summers. And so it wasn't while at school thing. So that was, kind of just a gift to be able to be a part of while I was at school. And obviously the engineering load is not small, so there's plenty to do. But then, I'd go back, and this is, part of it too. It's like, I'd go back and I'd go work for my uncle at his rental store. And that's what I do during the summers, So it's, again, family owned businesses, jumping in and being a part of it. So, but yeah, and then that changed a little bit though when I got to senior year. Actually, I forgot. I did a little bit of actually work at Calvin's physical plant. I actually worked in their drafting department a little bit there too. So that's where I kind of built up my drafting chops. So, and I was actually realizing I did that sophomore junior year, I think. I don't think I did it much senior year, but yeah, a couple of years there in the middle, I had on campus job, which was really nice. Weird, I forgot about that, but I did. But yeah, then senior year I actually transitioned, and so it ties in though, because and this is kind of how I got into the industry I am, which we can kind of make this transition now too. But so working in the physical plant, one of the projects I was working on was when Calvin was building their new / rebuilding and expanding the Fine Arts Center, and kind of doing a bunch of additions, and we were looking at, okay, we got a bunch of new offices for a bunch of teachers and just really the profs out there who are like, okay, this is where we're going to go. And so one of my responsibilities in that role was really just stepping in and being like, okay, I'm going to work in AutoCAD and we're going to design your office for you. Like, here's the things that we can do. We can look at layouts together and we can kind of talk it through. So that was kind of one of the first experiences I got with sitting down with clients per se, we'll call it that, and getting out there and really just starting to develop, here's a list of needs and wants, and kind of so starting to develop some scope, figure out what we want to do and some layouts, and then bringing that all back to create drawings and really start to create some blueprints for these offices, and just kind of being like, all right, here's the list of equipment, here's where bookshelves are going to go, here's how many, here's what the desk is going to be shaped like, because it's all those fun things. And so and because that went the way it did, which was really, I think it went well, I got involved in another project that they were doing in the engineering building, which essentially was one of the professors in the engineering department is vibrations and acoustics master. Super smart dude. One of his vibrations classes is still one of the hardest classes I think that exists at Kelvin. But hey, made it through. Kind of. But so for that, he was looking at, I don't know if it was grant money or what it was, but they'd been looking at a project to basically build an acoustic chamber. Okay. And so I got involved in that too, where it's like, I helped draw out the floor plan and kind of build it out, and then made a connection with an actual architectural engineering department at GMB, which is, another company in Holland that, where I ended up interning through my senior year. Because of that connection. And actually, I mentioned Jim earlier. He was one of the principals over there. So it's that was kind of a cool way to be like, hey, do you guys do internships? And so I had a chance to kind of get out there and do that. But that was kind of my first introduction into oh, hey, building and construction industry. It's mechanical engineering, and there's a little different than it is for automotive or others. But I think I'm actually good at this. I like building. I really like building, and I like kind of bringing those ideas together and being a part of it. And so from that instance, it was kind of all right, so here we go. And then interned there, and then that kind of spun into jobs. And so
love it. Yeah. Thanks for breaking that down. I'm curious now, those first couple projects that you did, those first couple internships and jobs that you got involved with, obviously you're going to school for engineering.
Yeah.
You've talked about some of the need for leadership in your courses, as well as some of the projects you've worked on. Now, those ones specifically where you're working in the engineering department, the vibrations lab, whatever you're working on, what was some of the things that you felt like the skills you lacked? So an example, like, was it more on the technical side where, oh shoot, like, I don't know how to do a layout. I don't know all the things to consider for a vibration. Like, what do I need to do in this scenario? Or was it more on the like business sense of like communication, presentations, like anything come to mind as you think back to that, like the biggest skill that maybe you lacked and that you had to like, oh shoot, I got to figure this out fast.
Oh yeah. Ironically enough, I think the technological, at least the drafting of the systems and understanding what was needed, that came fairly natural.
Yeah.
I was completely oblivious to the whole, like, what does it actually take to get this thing built? And the responsibility and the really the expertise of being like, okay, I'm going to show a wall, but what does that mean? It's like, it's just kind of like, so that was kind of one of those first instances for me of being like, I can put stuff on paper all day long and it looks great and it's a layout and it's like, here's what we need and it's the right space. But it's like, actually having the mental connection to being like, oh, this is what this is going to look like in 3D. I was just like, nope, I didn't have that yet at all. And granted, it's like, I kind of being in that role too, there's definitely spots where like that was okay at the time. Like it wasn't like a need or anything, but that's why we were talking with actual architects and actual engineers about like, what does this need to be able to build it? Because college Jason is like, hey, the print looks good.
Look at this picture. It's gorgeous.
It's beautiful. That's a happy picture. And it's like, but no. So, but I think that's actually like learning that piece has served me really well kind of in my engineering career today to be really being able to understand like, and make that connection now of like, okay, 2D drawings mean something, but what does it actually mean in 3D space? And how do you actually build that? So I think I've probably turned that into a career on itself, which has been really cool. So
one of the things when I have worked with different team members over the years, or even customers or suppliers, whatever, I've jumped into conversations when I work on projects and just assume that everyone knows how to do project management, right? And everyone knows how milestones work and what like the end, how you start with that end in mind and kind of work your way backwards. But then I think about my college career and I'm like, I didn't learn that in college. Like, how can I assume that this person knows this? So I get frustrated sometimes. We're like, how did we not think about the small tasks that lead to the big thing, right? But, sometimes we need to just communicate those because not everyone had the experience like you did where you had to learn those early on.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So you had those internships on like amazing opportunities. Now, how was finding a job right out of college?
Ooh, it was kind of scary until it wasn't. So, so I graduated a couple years after, our big financial upheaval of 2008. So I was a little after that. So market was recovering and everything was good, but I definitely was at a spot where I think I probably put out like half a dozen resumes and had some interviews and did some things. And it was like, nothing really hit yet. And then kind of when it hit, it was like, oh, we're like, yeah, this was good. And it was ready to go. And so that was, but that ironically enough, that came about a month before graduation. So I was like, wasn't sure what was going to happen. And then it was like, oh, hey, look, a job. Cool. Let's go.
Yeah.
And looking at that job and what it turned out to be was actually really cool. So that position specifically, transition that direction maybe a little, was, again, kind of mechanical engineering, building and construction industry. Was like, I wasn't totally sold on the fact I wanted to go that way, but I think everything about it was like, hey, a great opportunity. Perfect. Timing was good. Let's do it. And really got, again, kind of first step into mentorship where, and this is one thing I always appreciate about the building and construction industry that is, it's really easy to see it with like electricians or with plumbers or, the guys in the field installing stuff where, like the word apprentice is a very real thing, but that totally exists on the engineering side too, where, and even like professional licensure ends up the exact same way. It's like you don't get a PE license without 4 years of experience. And so like a lot of those things. And so, but that was the first 3 years of my career kind of jumping in and being under mentorship, being taught and being brought up in this industry and really what it takes with. And one of the other things was just the idea that, now with this spark of me like taking responsibility and owning things more, I think I grabbed as much as I could early, as far as learning about all the different systems and everything else, like, super deep, getting into the nitty gritty of all the engineering and the design notes, and then transitioning into project management surprisingly quickly.
So this was in Kalamazoo, you mentioned,
Yeah.
and then
Yep.
this was more like when you say mechanical, describe that a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So mechanical engineering in the building and construction world is all about keeping you warm in the winter. So anything HVAC, cool in the summer. So air conditioning outside. So it's all the ducts, it's all like the ceiling stuff, you can look around and everything that kind of exists to create space comfort and health, really. Ventilation, air, and everything else that kind of comes with that meeting, and it all falls into this category of with code requirements and everything else. And so that's a big chunk of what you learn is like, what are the codes? And so that's kind of the main piece. And then within that, there also are things that like, okay, we have air moving systems, we have water moving systems, we have plumbing systems that exist. So that also is anything from, making your toilet flush to, making sure you got hot water for a shower in the morning. And so all those things. And so that was where, you kind of start in some areas, start to grow and start to learn. And that was kind of, that's kind of the mechanical bubble within building and construction world.
Yeah, and I feel like that industry and the job that you had, you're really blessed to have the opportunity of mentorship, because I know
absolutely.
Some scenarios, your kids graduate from college with mechanical engineering degrees, they're thrown into a job and said, you
figure it out.
Figure it out. We assume you know everything now.
Or here's your list of reports you have to run today, or here's, do the math on this. And
they don't have the coach or mentor within inside the organization, so they have to find that outside the organization.
Absolutely.
That's not that easy to do. So
Absolutely.
It's awesome to hear that at the start of your journey, in industry, you had that. And I think, that's probably more common in your industry than others, but
quite possibly.
Yeah.
But it's also one of those where, I look back on that too, and it's, again, recommendations about, what do you do and how do you actually do this well, is thinking about, we've been talking about mentorship a couple times, but I think that's a great way. Honestly, it's probably one of the most valuable things that you won't think is valuable in the moment, but you look back on some of those conversations and you're like, oh yeah, you definitely said that. Or like, that was definitely something that came out in that moment. And I was like, oh, duh.
Yeah.
And so, but just those opportunities to learn and grow there is, kind of just falls into this whole category of, there's different ways you can get wisdom. And like, that's probably one of the easiest, least painful ways to get it, is to actually hear and listen and understand and make it a part of yourself before you learn it the hard way. So, but yeah, so.
So now this is 2011, 2012, about that time frame. And then you moved on for Kalamazoo and you went up to Grand Rapids, you mentioned. So
yes, I did.
What caused that transition and what got you into Grand Rapids area?
Yeah. So that transition was an interesting one. And it actually, I think there's a lot of development for me built into that transition. So I kind of alluded to a little earlier where, jumping into project management early and, grabbing a lot of stuff earlier was really just, it kind of came out mostly at the kind of almost this crown jewel project of, we were working on a, big manufacturing plant. The engineering firm I was working for was technically owned by a mechanical contractor. So we were kind of designing / installing at the same time. And so through that process, there ultimately ended up needing to be somebody there who was like, all right, yeah, no, I'm looking at drawings, I'm coordinating with the field guys, and I'm talking with things, and kind of realized through those couple of years and through the good mentorship I had that, hey, it's like we can run with things and we can go somewhere. But also realizing that like that started kind of lit a fire in me a little bit in some instances, more than some instances. And some of that fire was really tied to like, I wanted more. Like I wanted more responsibility. I wanted more things that were like, would come in time. But it's like, I just wanted more. And I was kind of looking at, company leadership at the time. And I was like, I don't think I'm going to get it here. Kind of just starting to get to a spot where I was like, this is just kind of all there is here, which is totally valid. Like, and that's one of those things, like sometimes you just find yourself there where, professional growth, you might be outpacing the role that you're in and the ability that you have in your, in your current organization, and totally fine. And so I took that and I was like, okay, let's see what else we can find. And so found an opportunity when, up in Grand Rapids at another, architectural engineering company. So it was a bit more independent, but they did, mostly facility design and everything else too. So kind of same deal. And kind of what I looked there is like, I kind of talk about the difference between my first job and second job was first role was really learning like how, like, okay, so like, how do you actually do this engineering? How do you size this pump? How do you size this pipe? It's like, how do we make sure there's enough heat in this building to keep it warm? And then my second position was actually more of like all right, now we're learning more intentional project management. Like, so leading through client conversations and starting to get to that point. And, I kind of looked at it too. And like my young snappy self, I was like kind of leaving the first job. And, one of the questions we were talking about, like in a little going away lunch was like, so where do you see yourself in 10 years, 5 years, somewhere in there? And I was like, I'd like to own an engineering company one day or a piece of it. So I was like, even then I was hungry.
Yeah.
I wanted it. And it was like, all right, let's go. So kind of took a couple of steps from there. And then, so moved to Grand Rapids and had a chance to learn from another very smart dude. And through that process again, got actually, some really cool project experience, really great interactions, made some more, expand the network a little bit more again. I still work with some of those guys today, which is kind of fun. But yeah, and then kind of just kept going and kept being, kept looking for that and kept nurturing this, kind of that drive, that fire. And it's like, by the time, and they kind of said this when I left my first gig too, it was like, they kind of could start to see it already too, where like, there was just this drive that was like, you probably could, like, you stick around here long enough, you probably could be running this place one day if you wanted it.
So you mentioned drive, you mentioned being a business owner, you mentioned owning an engineering firm, like you mentioned these things, but like why? Like what was the thing that motivated you? Was it money? Was it this like seeing the title and like, okay, that title's cool?
Yeah.
Was it the freedom, ability to have a little flexibility? Is there something that pops into your mind of like what drove you to have that as a goal?
Yes. I think probably the biggest portion of that drive and that desire for me really was just like responsibility, ownership, and really just like wanting to have really the freedom and be able to be in that seat where I kind of had control of my own destiny. And so, kind of looking at, and I can talk a little bit more about that idea of responsibility. And it's like, it's one of those like, you take personality tests and it's like, this one was really great, but it's one of those, Strengths Finder, it was the one it was. And so they give you like the top 5 characteristics that are like, there's 26 of them or something. Number 1 for me is responsibility, if you hadn't picked up on that already. But it mattered. And it was something that I was looking at for myself. And I was like, it's not just about, wanting to have responsibility for things. It's why. And the why for me was really about wanting to be able to have control of, like almost of enough environment where I could kind of create space and environment for other people as well. And so I kind of look at that too. And that's been a real pattern for me as well, is like wanting to intentionally, like I will step into leadership situations where, we might need something in order to create some potentially safe space for people, or a space where it's like, okay, this is not necessarily a healthy work environment. I'm going to make some intentional moves here to actually make it better. It's like, and I tend to take the hit on a lot of those things just because it's like, I want that for other people as well. And so I think that's where, that's kind of where that big drive, I look back and kind of continue to suss out where it all fits. And for me, that's the big one, I think, is just this ability and this want to be able to like, yes, have, autonomy for myself and control over my own destiny, but also like, I want to create, good, healthy space and help that, basically get people set up for the most success that they can have in their positions as well. So
let's talk a little bit about that transition that you made to becoming a business owner and getting that responsibility. When did that happen and how did that decision take place?
Absolutely. Fantastic story. So my first business ownership opportunity really came where, it's one of those where I was starting fresh. I was starting on my own, and this is like, now we're fast forwarding a little ways into COVID era. Because COVID changed a lot of us for a lot of different reasons and a lot of, it's like everything. But so that process for me was, in COVID was very much like, okay, let's dive deep. And so I went deep into like skills and, it's like, I went in a whole bunch of stuff that like, I don't even remember exactly where it all landed. But through that process, one thing became very evident was that the role I was in at the time was like, all right, this is definitely checking some boxes, but only a couple. And I was looking for more. And it was like actually a great opportunity to be like, I think I can do this on the side, And so I had a conversation with my employer at the time, was like, hey, I think I'm happy where we're here. I'm like 6 months into the newer role.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, the funny thing, like my first, I think, yeah, we were still in the middle of COVID and everything was happening. And it was like, I'm still getting my feet wet and everything else is happening. And I'm like 6 months in and I'm like, I'm going to start this company.
Yeah.
And, but the funny part of the story, and that's the thing that I'm kind of half giggling about, is just that, so one of my buddies was like, if you don't do this, we're not friends anymore. And I was like, okay. So it was kind of one of those like half shy, half like, all right, we're going for it.
Why did you say that?
I think it was kind of one of those where, so being an engineer myself, one of the things that I do naturally is, because I like, and we've talked about this, it's because I basically operate under the assumption I know what I'm doing. I often won't move until I know like 95 or 100% of what's going to happen. And so like, that's just a trap that I think it's really easy to fall into for engineering types, and actually for really anybody with, dealing with the unknown. And so for me, he always loves, my buddy Chris, he always loves kind of pushing me outside of my comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a great opportunity to just be like, he knew I needed a push. He knew I was ready. I kind of knew I was ready enough, but I was like, maybe I could just get a little bit more. But I was kind of, I don't know, I laugh at it because I'm like looking back on it, I was like, yeah, I probably should have done it sooner. But, that's kind of how it goes. And so, but, so made the jump, got everything filed. And it was like, so right off the bat, I'm learning like, oh, here's how you file an LLC. Here's how you do all this stuff. And so many more opportunities to learn. And then eventually I learned how to run payroll for myself. And eventually all that kind of came together too. But yeah, I think the first year of doing business was like, it kind of scared me how much revenue I was able to do on the side. And I was like, oh yeah, you could totally do this full time. Which, one of the cool things we talk about too is maybe some of the best ways for entrepreneurs to get started is like, if you can do it on the side and you start to transition that into like, oh, we have now, okay, so we're building client bases. We're starting to, build reputation. The shingle's been hung for a good while now. And it's like, just kind of keep pushing, keep spinning the wheel. Then all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's a project. We're good to go. So, which at that point it was about maybe like a year and a half into, which is Intune Engineering was my first one. And so about a year and a half into that, it was like, all right, here's a project. It's going to set us up for basically making this full-time go. And so made the jump then, and it's like off we were running. And I was like, then all of a sudden you realize it's like, it's possible I may never work for anyone else again. And it's like, that's kind of wild. So, but
so Intune Engineering, you mentioned, and what was your vision for Intune Engineering?
Oh, I was, and am, very excited about the idea of having an engineering company that like does engineering from a very relational standpoint. And so, we kind of talk about, I've said this a couple times, where responsibility for people and wanting to connect and kind of wanting to do that way. And so really the bread and butter there is the relationship. And so I kind of built Intune, and, kind of with being as musical as I am, like Intune was great. I love the name, and tied it very much back to a conversation of saying something that was like in my heart, and kind of what I'd started feeling was like, okay, what the industry really needs, and what I think is, like some untapped potential here, is really just the idea that I want to do all of this engineering within the context of other relationship. And like, that's something that like, while at the time I thought it was going to be like specific for Intune, that ended up being a me thing. Like that just ended up being something that like characteristics about, myself, and something that I really, I've grabbed onto, and things that I want to just keep doing. It's like business within context of relationship and all those other things. Cause it's one thing to have like, contracts out there or working with people that it's just like, yeah, we're doing business, things are going well. But also like, if it's not like, if I don't know them, or like, it's like, I just naturally try and connect with people that way. And it's like, if that connection isn't there, or it's just like things aren't lining up right, it's like not as much fun. So, which, not every aspect of doing business is fun. So when you have things that are fun, is like, okay, this is actually pretty great. Like, let's try and work with people we want to work with. And that just is great and fun. So
I do fun things with cool people for a long time.
Exactly. You do that. And then it's like, then you're set up for success for the long term, because then they're having fun. We're having fun. let's go.
So tell me the story about Intune. You started it during COVID. You ran it for about a year and a half, kind of moonlight. You know, I've been in that situation before too, 50 hours in the day, 50 or during the, work week, 50 hours then in the work evenings. And now we've got a 100-hour week, and you know, that gets tiring pretty quick. But you said, okay, now's the time. I got that big project. Learned how to file an LLC, which, maybe was easier than you expected, but and the payroll part. And then you start talking taxes and all the other things, which probably had some learnings in their own. Tell me a little bit about the journey of Intune and kind of where you guys are today, kind of a little bit about that process over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. So Intune has been around now, because we started that in 2021. October. So it's been 4 years and change now. Which doesn't feel like a very long time sitting here now, where it's just like, that went fast. Because I remember doing like I was excited we got to 2 years, and I was like, I think I completely missed year 3, and I was like, where'd that go? And then we're here at year 4 and getting into year 5. And so, so through that process, we've definitely matured a little bit. I think the cool thing is we've been able to hang on to like the heart of it, right? So within the context of relationship has been great. And so, while I've, this is kind of the interesting thing too. So it still remains mostly something that like, I'm still the primary engineer. It's like, I have, one part-time guy that kind of comes in with me every once in a while, but then I have another buddy that, I've tried to hire, but he's, it's like, he also wanted to do his own thing too. So basically we kind of created a team ourselves, and we kind of go after projects together. And so, it's, while we started Intune with some bigger ideas, we've also been very comfortable just kind of hanging out in, kind of some smaller settings and kind of just doing what we like to do and being there. And, that's left room for some other things too, which has been kind of fun because, most of us, once we start one company, we're like, what else can we do? So there's been some of that too, but yeah, so Intune continues to go, and it continues to be something that like, we're doing work every day, and it's like a lot of good things are happening. So
as you think about kind of your journey, where you're at today, and those different things that you have going on, what are you most excited about when you think about the future, right? What the next few years are bringing? You mentioned, hey, I've got Intune, but there's some other things that maybe are on the table too. You mentioned relationships. Just tell me a little bit about what excites you going forward. 2025 we're in right now. But
right. It's almost the end of it now.
Far away.
Oh gosh. No, I think probably one of where I look at the future now is, and like obviously we're talking about success, today is kind of one of our goals, right? And how we get here, what does it look like? And, what is the definition of a success that we want to work for, right? And so I think for me, one of the things that I realized with that is that it can change, right? So the idea of, and targets for future, like our goals can really be something that can adjust and move. And so I'm kind of working through some of that right now. But I think, when I look at, for me right now today, the definition of success really falls into doing the best with what you can today. And, really just succeeding on the daily basis and doing the best you can with the gifts that you've been given and being able to jump into that. And so that's where, kind of painting the picture of what the future looks like for myself. I'm excited about how, through this whole thing, one of the biggest takeaways from starting Intune and running it was just realizing that, man, I really like the operational aspect of business. It's like, I just really enjoy that. And, anything from like, it's like balancing the budget at the beginning and end of the month, or it's like it's running payroll, or it's like some of those tasks, and being able to care for people in that way as well is something that I was like, I paint big pictures for myself, and it's like I kind of realized like I like the operation of business. And so kind of looking at what does 10 years down the road look like for me, it's like I kind of envision less and less day-to-day engineering, more and more company leadership, more and more operations, more and more leadership and ownership in that instant. But so as opportunities come up, it's always like, well, what do you do now? And so right now we're in the midst of an opportunity where we've got another organization that's called XWork, which is been working on that one for a little while too. Is kind of like cool side project. Gave it a run. Kind of didn't do exactly what we wanted it to initially, and so we kind of pulled back a little bit. But are kind of at a spot now too, where it's like, I mean, I also talked about it earlier, where my dad's company, after he passed away, it's like the big question mark: what do we do with this thing? And so part of the thing that we're realizing now is like, I think there's opportunity here for us to kind of take some of that organization and pair it up with something that we've been dreaming about to create something new. And so a lot of that really falls into doing the best with what today might very well being like, hey, we've got a great team of people who are ready to go work and have done a really good job at building relationship themselves with their clients. And it's like, kind of my mind, I'm like, don't waste good. It's like, there's some good things happening here and there's some healthy things. There's some growth to be had as well. But it's one of those, like, of course there is, it's like, there's always room for growth and there's always room for, individual development. And it's like, the team is young and excited and ready to go. And I'm like, let's do this thing. So like, we're taking some active steps there now too, where, and probably one of the big struggles is for me is now going to be like, okay, we have Intune and now we have X work. How do these balance each other? And that's one thing that's like, that'll be some of my challenge coming up in the next little bit as well, is just trying to understand what does that look like. But the whole conversation is like, I still am very excited about both, because it's like, they're both, Intune's my baby and like X work is just like very cool opportunities and very exciting future. And it's just like, let's go. So
I love that.
Yeah.
You said let's go a couple of different
Yep.
times. I love that kind of idea of like just make it happen, and that motivation, that excitement that you have around what you do,
Yes,
and that passion
absolutely.
that you have around what the next few years are going to bring, and the vision of bringing a couple different organizations together and
Yeah.
what that looks like. I mean, we've talked about your journey, and actually you jumped ahead and answered the what
the
is your
next question.
definition of success already. So we'll
Sorry.
skip that. No, you're good. But I am curious. So we talked about this, and when you described looking back at your father's business and just childhood, and you mentioned like a lot of times we talk about the positive things and the good years and things, but we didn't talk too much about the times when things potentially were a little bit more
get hard.
difficult, right?
Yeah.
So, in business, we've got peaks and we've got valleys. We've got times in business ownership where things didn't go as well, whether it's a project or whether it's just, a whole year or a day, whatever.
Right.
So I'm going to ask
Yeah.
you about maybe one in your life, but as we think back through the purpose of the podcast and things like that too, I think there's a lot of people that, that are listening to your story and are like, well, great, Jason. Like, it sounds like, you had a lot of good things going for you, but like right now, I don't know what to do, right? I've got payroll coming up, or I don't even know how to do payroll, and I've got these struggles.
Right.
Is there one piece of advice or a story that you can tell, related to a valley through the journey over the last 5 years, or even prior to that, kind of let you pick?
Yeah. No. I think two things to talk about. First one is a little bit more personal with my stuff. And so looking at, I kind of blew past it earlier, but kind of just like what, X work and kind of where it started versus where we wanted it to go and everything else. And so one of the things we realized there was like, we made some investment, it's like some pretty significant investment. We weren't getting much return. Like we were definitely running negative cash there for a little while, which, I think it was hard because it was one of those, like, I'm in it with a friend and I'm in it with, like a business partner. It's like, we're great. We're making this run. It just was not working, and it wasn't working the way we thought we were going to go. We had a chance, like we were doing some work, and doing some, generating some revenue, but it just was not something that was like, it wasn't blowing up like we thought it was going to blow up. And so, or we'd hoped. And that's one of those, like, for me, that was kind of one of the first big shockers of like, I think Intune was a blessing, because it was like, this was smooth. It was clean. It was one of those that was like, it's in an industry where like this is actually needed, right? It's like, it's written into the code of like, you have to do this for your new building. So it's like, it was kind of the easy button, honestly, when I was looking at it. And that too, it's like, it's the difference as well between like, okay, this is a job versus a business. And so there's a lot of that distinction as well. So my first go at trying to be like, okay, we're going to do a business, and a little different, is kind of more in like a building, a business consulting role, or, kind of business partnership and coaching role, and being like, all right, let's go. And it's like, me being, that same mentality, let's give it a shot. All of a sudden being like 12 months later, being like, we got to stop. Like, we got to slow this thing down. Like, cash flow, it's not working. We can't survive here forever. So that was the first one where sometimes, like, keeping an eye on it and understanding that, like, and this was, it's hard lesson learned, is like kind of one of those, like, I probably should have pulled the plug, a couple months earlier. But also realizing that, okay, learning opportunity, expensive learning opportunity, but also learning opportunity. And so that's kind of where I look at it too. And I'm like, no matter what you're going through, it's like, there are absolutely hard things that you have to step through every once in a while. And sometimes those hard things involve like needing to ask for help, or needing to get to a spot where it's like, okay, we're just at a spot now where we just can't do this anymore. And sometimes that's the hardest thing, of being like, sometimes you have to let go of a dream, or, understand that your dream isn't what you thought it could be. And granted, through that process and everything else, obviously in the next couple of months after that was like, for me, that story with like my dad passing and then now having this new energy was like, no idea that was coming. Right. And so I think from that instance, like sometimes it's just like, there's opportunity to grow into things and to reuse old ideas, but sometimes you do have to take a step back when things are hard. And granted, it's like, I think a lot of that clarity going in when you're looking at entrepreneurship or business ownership is like knowing ahead of time, if you can, like how far are you willing to take this, and a lot of times, like you might hear people talk about like, okay, you need to be all in. You have to be all in to get this thing to go. But also like sometimes the responsibility that you have as, like as with family, as a parent for your kids, it's like sometimes you just can't. And so like that in itself is sometimes a very hard conversation to have. And so for me, that's another one where I'm a little different, where it's like, for me, I have nieces and nephews. I don't have kids of my own. I don't have it's like, I'm not married. It's like now I have, me and my mom hang out, we do things, which is great. So it's like, cause now I have an opportunity to care for her in a little different way. But through that process, it's also like, yeah, so I had an opportunity and I took it where I could run a little higher risk. But I think that's probably the biggest thing. And the trickiest thing is if, no one has any picture exactly of what the future is going to look like, but sometimes we can have good conversation and, understand that maybe the risk is a little bit too big or something like that. But
I love that.
Yeah, which, I kind of look back and it's like, ironically enough, I kind of wish I'd have been able to tell my dad that, like, looking back, what was that, 8 years ago or something like that? Cause one of the things that, you lose a parent or something like that. And it's like, there's a lot of paperwork, and there's a lot of like paper and tax information. There's stuff everywhere. And of course, when you've got a dad who owns a business, it's like that basically triples. I feel like there's like just so much more. And one of the things you look at that too, and it's just like, it wasn't, looking back at his financial history for the last, couple of years, it's just like, it became pretty evident. It was like, there was some stuff that he went through too, that I didn't know about. Like, and so they did a, private dude, very private guy. But there were some things there that was like, this was a hard time for him too. And it's like, it wasn't all shiny, even though he put on a good face as well. But it's like, I kind of wish I could have told him that in the instance too, where it was like, sometimes this is hard to do. And sometimes, it's, yeah. So not totally sure how to finish that sentence specifically, but
well, I think that thanks for sharing that, because it's real, right? There's definitely scenarios where, as someone that's setting out to start a new business or tell the world your vision, part of that is having a vision. The other part is telling the world. So you've got an idea, a business, something new that you want to create. Yeah. And in order for it to be successful, you have to tell other people, right? So you're out there spreading the word about what you're building, sharing the vision about where this thing's going, and then it doesn't go there. So what do? Right? You have the opportunity to say, hey, I'm going to double down. This is going to happen, which, there might be scenarios where that makes sense. Other times it's like, you mentioned, I wish I would have made that decision a few months earlier. Yeah. Like sometimes it's like we delay that decision. I know I've experienced this in my personal life as well as, talk to others that have done this as well. There's a little bit of pride there. It's I just told everyone I was going to do this. I can't now tell them no. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, we get into that a lot. Is it worth the, loss of sleep, the loss of revenue, whatever it ends up being just for our pride? You're going to learn, other people are going to learn, and they're still, it's all going to be okay. So, no, thanks for sharing that story. Thanks for sharing, your definition of ensuring that you do the best in what you're working on today, put your best foot forward in everything that you're doing, and also what you're excited about in the future. One last question before we wrap up here. As you're thinking about Jason in high school, middle school, college, what's one thing that you would say to yourself about the future, encouragement, whatever you want to say,
Yeah, I love that question. It's kind of funny. It's like, I really enjoy the question, but I look at myself, like as a kid, and it's like, I'm like, man, I could have engaged more. It's like just one of those, like just jumping in and being a part of, like engaging more with people on one-on-one basis, or kind of, doing a little bit more mentorship, or just like, cause I was a bit of a loner, and it's like, I kind of still am. And it's like, I kind of wish I'd have broken myself out of that a little bit more as a youngster, even though, like to my own comment earlier, it's just like, I'm very comfortable, because I'm introverted in nature, and that's just the way that I recharge, that I exist. But there's a line between, okay, there's recovery and recharge, but then there's also like, man, the good stuff's in conversations with others and being able to engage and like just really making those connections more and more, the more you can. It's like I think there's always something to be learned, and there's always people that, whether they influence you or you influence them, I think there's always value to be had there. So it's that human connection.
Yeah.
That's where it's at. I definitely would be like, let's get some more of that. So
yeah,
no, great insights, and no, completely agree. And I appreciate you for coming out and having this conversation, and
absolutely.
engaging and telling your story of your journey of success and kind of what's gotten you to where you're at today. So Jason, thanks again for coming on the Engineer Success Podcast. It's been amazing getting to know you a little bit more and sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Appreciate it.